The neighbors saw him as just a forgetful old man, an Alzheimer's patient who couldn't remember his past, a pitiful grandfather losing his mind. But when danger struck, the skills that emerged proved he was no ordinary retiree. He was a former CIA Black Ops agent. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we dive into this incredible story of forgotten memories and unforgotten skills, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe that some things run deeper than memory, hit that subscribe button. This story will change how you see the elderly people in your life. Frank Morrison sat in his worn leather recliner, staring at the photo in his weathered hands, with the confused expression that had become his trademark over the past 2 years. The picture showed a younger version of himself, in what appeared to be a military uniform, standing with several other men in front of an aircraft he couldn't identify. "Who are these people, Sarah?" he asked his daughter for the 4th time that morning. Sarah Morrison Chen looked up from her laptop with patient exhaustion etched on her face. At 45, she'd become expert at hiding the grief that came with watching her father disappear piece by piece. "That's you, Dad. From when you worked for the government, remember? Before you retired." Frank studied the photo again, his 78-year-old face creased with concentration. "Government work? I thought I was an accountant." "You were," Sarah said gently, though something flickered in her eyes. "You worked with numbers, important numbers." It was their daily routine now. Frank would find old photos, documents, or medals hidden throughout the house, remnants of a life he could no longer piece together. The doctors said it was typical for Alzheimer's patients to lose recent memories first, but Frank seemed to have lost decades. Everything from his 35-year career to his late wife's funeral 5 years ago had simply vanished. The neighbors on Maple Street knew Frank as the sweet old man who sometimes forgot where he lived, who would wander the sidewalks looking confused until someone gently guided him home. They'd see Sarah's car in the driveway more and more often as she checked on him, bringing groceries and pills organized in those weekly containers that had become symbols of aging in America. What none of them knew was that Frank Morrison had never been an accountant. "He can't live alone anymore, Sarah. It's not safe." Dr. Patricia Wells, Frank's neurologist, delivered the news with practiced compassion in her sterile office. Sarah sat across from her, gripping a folder full of cognitive test results that painted a clear picture of decline. The incident last week where he couldn't remember how to unlock his front door, then called 911 thinking someone had changed his locks. It's not going to get better. We need to start discussing care facilities. Sarah nodded, though her heart felt heavy. He's been asking about his past more lately, finding things around the house that he doesn't remember. Old photos, some kind of medal, documents I've never seen before. "That's common, Doctor," Wells explained. "Sometimes patients fixate on periods of their life that feel significant, even if they can't remember why. Has he talked about his work? You mentioned he was in government accounting." "That's what he always told us growing up," Sarah said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "Though some of the things I've been finding in his house, they don't look like accounting documents." Dr. Wells leaned forward. "What kind of things?" "Photos of him in military gear, though he always said he never served. Letters with government seals I don't recognize. And yesterday I found a gun safe in his basement that I didn't even know existed. When I asked him about it, he got agitated and said it wasn't his." "Patients often become paranoid about possessions," Dr. Wells said. "The gun safe is concerning for safety reasons, though." "Do you have the combination?" "No, and neither does he, apparently. He keeps saying it belongs to someone else, someone named Morrison, but that's his last name." Sarah rubbed her temples. "Doctor, Is it possible he had some kind of life we didn't know about? My mother died when I was young, and Dad raised me alone. He never talked about his work, always said it was too boring to discuss. Dr. Wells paused her note-taking. Sarah, in my experience, when Alzheimer's patients become fixated on mysterious aspects of their past, it's usually their mind trying to make sense of fragmented memories. But I'd recommend securing any weapons in the house, regardless of whether he remembers them or not. What neither Sarah nor Dr. Wells understood was that Frank Morrison's fixation on his mysterious past wasn't confusion at all. It was the last functioning part of his trained mind trying to warn them about something his conscious memory could no longer access. That evening, Sarah sat in Frank's kitchen going through boxes of documents she'd never seen before. Her father dozed in his chair, the same photo clutched in his hands, occasionally muttering names she didn't recognize. The paperwork was strange. Official-looking documents with heavy redactions, travel records to countries her father had never mentioned visiting, and correspondence with agencies identified only by acronyms. Most disturbing were the medical records, treatments for injuries she'd never known he'd suffered, including what appeared to be gunshot wounds and references to psychological evaluation post-mission. "Dad," she said gently, waking him. "What was Operation Blackwater?" Frank's eyes snapped open with an alertness she hadn't seen in months. For just a moment, something shifted in his expression, a hardness, a focus that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. "Blackwater is compromised," he said clearly, his voice carrying an authority that made Sarah straighten in her chair. "Extraction Protocol 7. Assets need immediate relocation." "Dad, what are you talking about?" Frank blinked, and the moment passed. The confusion returned to his eyes like fog rolling in. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Did I fall asleep? Who are you again?" Sarah stared at her father, her mind racing. For 30 seconds, he'd sounded like someone else entirely. Someone who knew things about operations and protocols and assets. Someone who definitely wasn't an accountant. She was still processing this when she heard the sound of her father's back door opening quietly. Frank heard them before Sarah did. Even with his conscious memory failing, 40 years of training had carved neural pathways too deep for Alzheimer's to completely erase. His head tilted slightly, catching the sound of careful footsteps on his back porch. 3 men, professional spacing, non-standard entry pattern, weapons likely. Sarah was still reading documents at the kitchen table when Frank's demeanor suddenly changed. Without seeming to move consciously, he had repositioned himself between the kitchen and the hallway, his body language shifting into something Sarah had never seen before. "Sarah," he said quietly, his voice carrying that same strange authority, "go to the basement. Now." "What? Dad, what's wrong?" 3 hostiles, rear entry. Move to secondary position and wait for all clear." Before Sarah could respond, the back door opened with the soft click of professional lock-picking tools. Frank's hand had somehow found a kitchen knife, though Sarah couldn't remember seeing him pick it up. "Mr. Morrison," a voice called from the hallway, "we just want to talk." Frank's response was immediate and chilling. "Moscow rules. You came to the wrong house." The first man entered the kitchen and found himself facing someone who no longer looked like a confused elderly patient. Frank Morrison stood with perfect balance, the carton knife held in a grip that spoke of extensive training, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're supposed to be retired, old man," the intruder said, raising his weapon. "Retirement was cover," Frank replied, and moved with speed that defied his age and condition. What happened next would be analyzed by federal investigators for months afterward, though the official report would never be made public. Frank Morrison's conscious mind might not remember his real name, his wife's face, or what he'd eaten for breakfast, but his body remembered 40 years of kill-or-be-killed training. The knife moved with surgical precision, finding the space between the first intruder's body armor with the expertise of someone who'd done this countless times before. The second man came through the doorway firing, but Frank was already moving, using furniture and angles with tactical knowledge that emerged from somewhere deeper than memory. Sarah watched in shock as her elderly father, who sometimes forgot how to operate the television remote, systematically dismantled 2 armed professionals. The third intruder, seeing his partners go down, called out, "Agent Morrison, we're CIA, stand down." Frank paused, knife still raised, and for a moment, confusion flickered across his features. "CIA? What's my clearance level?" "Ultra," the man replied carefully. "Operation Blackwater was compromised. We're here for extraction." "Blackwater?" Frank's face went blank. Who are you people? Why are you in my house?" The surviving intruder, who Sarah now realized might actually be some kind of federal agent, slowly holstered his weapon. "Sir, you're Frank Morrison, CIA Operations Division, retired. These men weren't with us. They were here to eliminate you." Frank looked around at the scene he'd created. 2 unconscious men, a kitchen that looked like a war zone, and his daughter pressed against the wall in terror. "I don't understand," he said, his voice small and lost again. "I'm an accountant, I think. Sarah, who are these people?" Agent David Chen, no relation to Sarah's married name, sat across from Sarah in her father's living room while EMTs attended to the unconscious intruders. Frank dozed in his chair, apparently having no memory of what had just occurred. "Your father was never an accountant, Ms. Morrison Chen. He was one of our most valuable field operatives for 35 years. Black operations, deep cover assignments, classified at levels that don't have names." Sarah felt her world tilting. "That's impossible. He raised me. He was home every night. He helped with homework and made dinner and—" "Cover identities are most effective when they become real lives," Chen explained. "Your father genuinely lived both existences. But when operations required his particular skills, Frank Morrison, the accountant, would go on business trips, and Agent Morrison would handle situations that never officially happened. The memory loss. Probably genuine Alzheimer's, but it's possible there's a psychological component. Men like your father carry memories that can be difficult to live with. Sometimes the mind protects itself by forgetting." Sarah looked at her father, snoring peacefully in his chair. "Those men who broke in, foreign operatives. Your father eliminated a cell in Prague in 1987. Apparently some people hold long grudges." Chen paused. "Ma'am, what happened here tonight proves that even with his condition, your father is still extremely dangerous. His body remembers what his mind has forgotten. What happens now? Now we relocate him to a secure facility where he can receive proper care. There are other retired operatives there, people who understand what he's been through." Sarah felt tears building. "Can I visit him?" "Of course. And Sarah, your father was a hero. The things he did, the people he saved, the operations he completed. They prevented wars, stopped terrorist attacks, saved thousands of lives. He just could never tell anyone, not even you." Frank stirred in his chair, opening his eyes to see Sarah crying. "Why are you sad, sweetheart? And who's this nice young man?" Sarah wiped her eyes and smiled. "This is David, Dad. He's here to help." Frank nodded politely. "Are you here about my accounting work? I'm afraid I can't remember much about that these days." Meadowbrook Assisted Living didn't look like a facility for retired spies, and that was intentional. From the outside, It appeared to be an upscale care home for elderly patients with memory issues. The staff wore normal nursing uniforms, the gardens were peaceful, and visiting families saw exactly what they expected to see. What they didn't see were the subtle security measures, the specialized staff trained in both geriatric care and handling patients with lethal skills, or the fact that several residents had been responsible for some of the most significant covert operations in American history. Frank adjusted well to his new routine. He attended art therapy, where he painted detailed maps of cities he couldn't consciously remember visiting, participated in group activities with other retirees who also had mysterious gaps in their personal histories, and received visits from Sarah twice a week. Most of the time, he seemed like any other elderly patient struggling with memory loss, but occasionally something would trigger the deeper programming. When another resident had a heart attack, Frank immediately administered perfect CPR while rattling off medical procedures in what sounded like military jargon. When a maintenance worker's ladder began to fall, Frank moved with impossible speed to catch it, his body reacting with reflexes that belonged to someone decades younger. How much does he really remember? Sarah asked Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the facility's director, during one of her visits. More than he realizes, less than he needs. Dr. Walsh replied, "Your father's conscious memory is severely compromised, but his procedural memory, skills, reflexes, training, remains largely intact. It's like having a master craftsman who's forgotten he knows how to use his tools, but whose hands still remember every motion." Sarah watched through the window as Frank sat with other residents in the garden. He was laughing at something one of them had said, looking for all the world like a harmless grandfather enjoying retirement. "Is he happy?" she asked. "I think he's at peace," Dr. Walsh said. "For men like your father, forgetting can sometimes be a mercy. The things they did, even for the right reasons, leave scars. Maybe his mind is finally allowing him to rest." 6 months later, Sarah brought her 8-year-old son, Michael, to meet his grandfather. The boy had been asking questions about why they never visited Grandpa Frank before, and Sarah had struggled to find age-appropriate answers. Frank lit up when he saw the child, though he couldn't quite place how they were related. "Hello there, young man. Are you here to visit someone?" "I'm Michael. I'm your grandson." Frank's face showed polite confusion. "I have a grandson. How wonderful. Would you like to see my room? I have some interesting pictures." As they walked through the facility, Michael peppered Frank with questions that revealed a 8-year-old's fascination with adventure. "Did you ever travel anywhere cool, Grandpa?" "I think I might have," Frank said thoughtfully. "Sometimes I have dreams about faraway places, mountains and deserts and cities with names I can't pronounce. Were you ever a spy? That would be so cool." Sarah tensed, but Frank just chuckled. "A spy? That sounds like something from the movies. I'm pretty sure I was an accountant, though I can't seem to remember much about numbers these days." They spent an hour looking through Frank's photo albums, carefully curated by the facility staff to include only safe memories. But when they were leaving, Michael hugged his grandfather goodbye and whispered, "I hope you remember the cool stuff someday, Grandpa." Frank's expression grew serious for a moment. He knelt down to Michael's eye level and said quietly, "Sometimes, young man, it's better to remember the people we protected than the ways we had to protect them." Sarah looked at her father with new understanding. Maybe he remembered more than any of them realized. Maybe the forgetting was a choice, as much as it was a disease. Conclusion. Frank Morrison continued living at Meadowbrook, his days filled with the gentle routine of assisted living. He painted, he played cards, he watched birds in the garden. Most of the time, He seemed like any other elderly man dealing with memory loss. But sometimes, late at night, he would sit by his window and watch the shadows in the parking lot with the alertness of someone who had spent decades knowing that threats could come from anywhere. And sometimes, when other residents were in danger, a choking incident, a fall, a medical emergency, Frank Morrison would respond with skills that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The staff learned to watch for those moments, not to stop them, but to appreciate them. They were glimpses of the man Frank had been, the guardian he had always remained, even when his mind could no longer remember why guarding others had become as natural as breathing. Sarah visited regularly, often bringing Michael, who had become Frank's favorite visitor, even though Frank couldn't quite remember their relationship. During one visit, Michael asked his grandfather about a medal he'd seen in a photo. "I'm not sure what that's for," Frank admitted, "but the nurse told me it means I helped keep people safe." "That sounds like good work, doesn't it?" "The best work," Michael agreed. Frank smiled, and for just a moment, his eyes held the clarity of someone who remembered exactly what it meant to stand between the innocent and those who would harm them. Even if he couldn't remember the details anymore, his heart still knew the importance of the mission. Some kinds of service run deeper than memory. Some commitments are written in muscle and bone and spirit, surviving even when the mind that made them has moved on to other concerns. Frank Morrison might have forgotten his name, his missions, and his medals, but he never forgot how to protect people, because some things don't live in memory. They live in character, and character, unlike memory, doesn't fade with age. Have you ever wondered about the elderly people in your life? The grandparents, neighbors, or strangers who might be carrying histories they can't or won't share. The man with shaking hands might once have been steady enough to save lives. The woman who seems confused might have once navigated complex situations with perfect clarity. We live surrounded by hidden heroes whose stories are locked away by time, illness, or secrecy. Their service continues in ways we might never recognize. Their skills emerge in moments we might never understand. Next time you meet an elderly person who seems lost or confused, remember, you might be looking at someone who once changed the world. Share this story if it reminded you to look deeper, to respect the elderly for what they might have been as much as what they appear to be now. Because every old person was once young, and many of them were extraordinary.